Welcome to another episode of Just For More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Lacey.
Hey.
You can find us online at justformorefix.com or on Twitter at justformorefix. If you like us, you can support us at Patreon, and you can give us a rating and review at iTunes or wherever you find us at. In this episode, we're going to talk about Threaticisms. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix.
I'm Willie D. Nelson from All Things Good and Nerdy, a pop culture podcast, part of the Gonna Geek Network. Just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other tantalizingly geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
Welcome to Just For More Fix. Only 2 announcements today, so our process with Hastings Party is moving along. I should have the rest of that finished editing tomorrow, although as this releases, it will be a couple days before that, and then we'll be getting it put up on our Patreon as a preview as we get the isometric map laid into our sort of centerpiece feature of it. And we'll have that out to you guys here very, very quickly in the next week or so. And so we're just going to jump into things right today. And today we're going to talk about a word we invented that's called Threaticisms. So we're trying to figure out some different topics or whatever to talk about. And I thought about we all have these go-to threats that we have that we always sort of fall back on for default bad guys or whatever. And so I thought we might just break down our favorites and our least favorites.
Okay.
And sort of like, not necessarily once we get past the initial part of it, but like thematically, why do you like this threat or why do you not like this threat, if that makes sense? So do you want to start off with your most fave or your least fave?
I don't know what my least favorite is yet, so I would like to start with my most favorite.
Right on. Why don't you go first?
Okay, my most favorite threat is the environment. Boom. No, but seriously though. Not messing around. It's the environment.
So like how so? What do you mean the environment?
All the extra stuff that isn't villains and like creatures. Or it can be creatures, but like ones that don't necessarily it's like not the dragon, right? Or it's not like the bunch of kobolds living in the cave.
Okay.
It could be like, like tiny lizards or something that are crawling about. Nothing with like any level of intelligence counts as part of the environment, right?
Okay.
But like weather, light or dark, climate, interesting plant life.
Okay.
Things like that. So, okay, you're watching The Princess Bride, right?
Right.
What's the best part of the movie? Threat-wise. It's not Prince Humperdinck because he's a douche.
True. I was going to go with the wedding.
No, it's the fire swamp.
Marriage.
It's obviously the fire swamp.
I was kind of thinking when they have Fezzik in the giant on the wheelbarrow thing, and he's huge and screaming.
Yeah.
That's a good part, too.
That is good. But he's on the side of good, which is the side of chaos.
Yeah, not the antagonist. Yeah. Also, the part where he tries, Inigo Montoya offers to help the Man in Black climb up the last bit of the Cliffs of Despair is pretty good, too. Mm-hmm. Cliffs of Despair, that's a good environment. Right, anyway.
Right. Again, good environment. Rocks, boulders, all of that.
Right. Know. Okay, so why don't we break that apart a little bit? So in terms of, it's kind of a broad thing, right? So is it just any environment or is it like specific pieces of it?
That's why it's cool because it changes every time.
Okay. So.
But it's still like the same key.
Right. Yeah.
Features.
Yeah. So do you want the environment as a threat on top of the regular game itself too? Do you know what I'm saying? So like it's almost like a character unto itself?
Yeah.
Okay. And then is that because it sort of gives more context to the game or more layers? Like it makes, do you know what I'm saying? Does it make sense?
It gives almost all of the context.
Right.
Because if I tell you that we're battling goblins, okay? So if I tell you we're battling goblins, standard goblin fare. If I tell you we're battling goblins inside a deep, dense forest with almost no light, then that's different, right?
Right.
If I tell you we're battling goblins on a ship in the high seas in the midst of a storm, that's a much different picture for you.
Okay.
And a much different set of challenges.
Right. Well, then I think that
Or mer goblins.
Oh, jeez. Mer goblin. No.
Under the ocean.
Nope. No. Although it does, it's one of those things where, like, in a lot of worlds, the goblins are created by some kind of like a warping force on the elves. So if the merfolk are sort of like the elves of the sea, it would stand to reason that there should be goblins of the sea too.
Glad we're on the same page.
I'm not saying they should exist. I'm just saying it's logically sound.
You feel like they're maybe half squid. They're like squigoblins.
Oh, no. Gobwids.
Anyway.
Octoblin.
Ooh, I like that one.
Return of the Octoblins. Anyway, I really think that I agree very much with what you're talking about. Now, obviously, a lot of the sort of games that we've been playing and running, and including the zines, have a very large component of the environment to them. They give, like in Worms, it gives a context about the cold and what that means in terms of the infection. And then with the Hastings Party, exposure and cold death and all of this kind of stuff is a big factor to it. So I very much agree. And I think it's almost one of those things where when you read pre-published adventures, unless the environment is so terrible, there's no sort of encounter effects on it, right? So you mentioned if you're on the high seas, right? So whether you're having to make balance checks or athletics checks or something to see if you can, keep your sea legs about you while things are going on, like that changes the fight dramatically because the terrain is wobbly and wavy the entire time. So I think that it's something that you could add into any adventure you wanted to very easily without changing anything, because even from the best, from the best adventure down to the worst adventure, the vast majority of them, unless there's a mechanical effect because of like extreme desert or something along those lines, it's just sort of a thing that sort of fades into the background. And unfortunately, I feel like wherever you sort of grew up or come from, that's just your default mind's eye for what you see for the terrain that the people are going through. Do you know what I'm saying?
I think time could be a fun one too. So like if you're playing in a game that's part of a historical setting, there's like some big event that happens, like just to pick an example that's obvious, Pompeii, right? So your characters are on Pompeii and it's, 2 days before the big,
right?
So now everything is stepped up challenge-wise because you're on a very serious time constraint.
Yeah. I hadn't thought of it that way. I always...
Or I guess, I don't know, should time be its own threat?
Well, I think it definitely could be, because as you talk about time, that shifts things in my mind a very different way, because I do feel like environment and time are two separate categories, or two separate entities. And both of them can very clearly be threats, but I think that they are two totally different things.
That's fair.
In thinking about environment, it's made me change, like... Hot Springs has made me think about environment a whole lot, because there's a lot of plants and a lot of sort of just like natural wildlife that are there. And that's what sort of makes that world come alive, is all those little fiddly bits about the crystal frogs or whatever, right? And I guess it may take a little bit of work on the part of the game master to sort of just do some cursory looking at like what are the common creatures that live in a swamp outside of the normal monsters that you're going to meet, like troglodytes or whatever it is that you're going to attack. But to sort of give context to, maybe there's pythons in the swamp, or maybe there's alligators or whatever it is, little frogs and little, plants are always cool to incorporate. Because that's the other thing, is I feel like for environments, we're very quick to incorporate animals, especially big ones, right? Or poisonous ones or whatever. No one mentions, oh man, that's the swamp pheasant, and they taste great. Like that's the best tasting pheasant you're ever going to find, right? Or plants.
ROUSs.
Right, yeah. Or like plants, unless it's like a treant or something that's giant's going to destroy everything. We just generally don't incorporate those kind of elements. And it's a big part of adventure fiction, is going into these sort of strange areas or these environments and having to struggle to do whatever it is, Well,
and even if it's not a place that's strange. So when I think about one of my favorite stories of all time is Dracula. Okay, so you have a lot of interesting environment things in that book. So one is just the mountain passes and, you know, there's snow and there's nighttime, there's wolves. And those could be, you know, not necessarily an environmental threat, but, you know, you can hear them howling in the background, and there's some thought that maybe there's Dracula's minions and everything. But even as you go farther along and you get into the castle, like the amount of time that's actually spent in the presence of another person when Jonathan Harker is in the castle is very minimum. But there's other things like the fact that it's so big and it's unfamiliar. There's the possibility of getting lost, getting turned around. There's locked doors. There's him trying to escape from the castle and not being able to. And all of this kind of lends itself, and even in and of itself, the castle is set up someplace where it's high, it's isolated, it's hard to get from there back to a town safely, even if you do get out.
Well, that's the interesting thing too, because it's in a, I don't know, that might be a really, not even might be, it's a great example of something, of several things. So obviously it's a literary classic, so it's got a lot to pull from, right? But so you have this extreme isolation, but you're in a place that used to, at some point, hold lots of people and have life in it, right? And now it doesn't. So it has this weird kind of juxtaposition of this used to be the center and defense of this entire area, and now it's just, you know, sort of old and ruinous and empty, right? And then because of when the story takes place, versus when the castle was still functioning, you have this another juxtaposition of what would be considered modern for when that story is taking place versus how old that castle is and the age of the tapestries and all of the things that are inside the castle, right? And then it's cold, it's dark, it's just has that sort of hollow feeling to it, like Dracula, right? It all sort of like the environment really in that is probably the greatest example where it's reinforcing all of the themes of the story or the main characters, the main antagonists of the story, right? So, like, the castle is kind of like a reflection or a metaphor of Dracula in a way, right? And I think it's really a cool way to think about environments, I guess, if you use them, maybe not every moment of the environment, but like your featured set piece, right? Think about that and think about how to use that in a way to sort of paint a better picture of what's happening and how it relates to your main antagonist or whatever it is. Right on. And I'm just the five senses because, you know, like you mentioned castle, right? So it's like, it's dark, it's echoey, it's huge, you know, the feel of the cold, wet stones everywhere.
Damp.
The wet. Yeah. So just because that really paints that picture. And in that case, I guess the castle isn't necessarily a threat except for it makes everything harder, which in and of itself is kind of a threat, I guess, you know? But it's very subtle. It's not something you identify right away as like, oh, that's going to kill me, right?
Yep.
Right on. All right, so I'm going to go with, I have two here, and I couldn't really decide. So one of my favorites relates back to one of my least favorites, and this one is ghosts. I think ghosts are really kind of a cool idea in that they're sort of like incorporeal and they, you know, not necessarily ghosts, but like spirits, right? So that could be deceased people, that could be like possessing demons and that kind of stuff, but they sort of like don't answer to the rules of our reality. And oftentimes they have more knowledge or hidden knowledge and that kind of stuff. Ghosts as spies, I think, is a really cool idea. Like if you're a Giovanni and you have access to this ghostly world to send people to go do things for you and all this kind of stuff. And you look at lots of really cool movies like 13 Ghosts and all like the broad spectrum of what each of those ghosts in that movie is, and then like wraiths and shadows and all these sort of incorporeal undead in D&D, I've always thought are really, really cool. And they're so far apart from what I think of as sort of like the boring undead, like zombies and skeletons and sort of like the unintelligent ones. They're just boring and they don't add anything to it, right? And then kind of touching on what you were talking about with the environment, specifically with Dracula, ghosts in that sort of like gothic literature sense, they're a reflection of the protagonist in a lot of ways. So like whatever moral conundrums or problems that the protagonist is having is sort of like reflected in the ghost in a lot of those stories. So they're kind of a cool story device to be able to sort of like reflect the bad moments that the characters had through bad decisions they've made or terrible things they've had to do or whatever. And I just think that they're kind of an interesting creature to deal with. And if it's not like a D&D game, a lot of times you just can't kill a ghost.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
It's a challenge that you're forced to deal with in a different way.
Right.
You can't just beat it away.
Right. There's no chopping up the ghost. So I don't know. It's just one of those things where they have this sort of, they have some kind of intelligence to them. Because that's one thing that really bothers me is with a lot of undead, especially like obviously zombies and whatever. But like there's no method to them, right? So
always like ghouls. They're really underutilized.
Right. Yeah.
Creepy creature.
Right. Well, Dracula dossier, or, like all the Dracula stuff, lots and lots of ghouls. Can't go wrong there. But I don't know. It's weird. But like I don't know. And the funny thing about it is, these are my favorites to encounter in a game, right? But I don't even know that I even use them well or hardly at all in the games that I run. Well, ghosts, do you know what I'm saying?
I feel like ghosts are difficult, though, because it's so easy for it to be a little bit cheesy or less meaningful or less impactful.
Right.
If, I don't know. Yeah, just if it's not dealt with.
Well, like you think about the ring wraiths from Lord of the Rings, right? Like that's like, whoa, like Sauron is cool and he's bad and whatever, but the moments that I remember from that movie are the ring wraiths, like when they're descending on the group of hobbits when they're in that little tower and they make the fire or whatever,
Yeah.
Like that's a crazy cool moment, or when they're chasing them down the trail, and I don't know, those are really, really amazing, super like creepy and thematic and atmospheric and all that kind of stuff. And you don't get that with the Urukai. It's like, oh, look, it's the strong orc. Wow. You know what I mean? Like, whatever. But they have this sort of, I don't know, it's like this extra gravity to them because there's something that they need to do that they have left undone that is so critically important to them that they're still here. Right? Mm-hmm. So they're already dead. What else do they have left to sacrifice? You know what I mean? You can't, it's kind of hard to have leverage over them in a way. So they're just a force of nature in a way. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, that's why Revenants are everyone's favorite anti-hero. Right. The Crow, Spawn, Ghost Rider.
Ghost Rider the comic, not Ghost Rider the movie, because it was
kind
bad.
of Punisher too. I mean,
right.
We could keep going.
I didn't even think about it in terms of the Crow, but you're 100% right though, because the Crow is a great example of how to make good use of a ghost or whatever, and especially in a World of Darkness sense of things, because it's like that is the perfect 90s angst World of Darkness, basically. Mm-hmm. It's just there's no vampires in that particular movie or whatever. So, all right. So, do you want to jump into least favorite, or do you have another favorite to mention real quick? Like a second place favorite?
I mean, I guess since I mentioned it in my environment, my second place favorite, then I suppose is time.
Right.
Yeah. I like the added sense of urgency that it gives to everything.
Well, and it sort of fits in anything, because no matter what you're doing, if there's some kind of external pressure pushing on you, then it makes everything that much more difficult.
And there always should be some kind of external pressure.
Right.
Otherwise, you're like, okay, we're going to go systematically, room to room, stab all the things, collect all the loot, look for traps, rinse and repeat. And
in terms of gameplay, it's pretty easy. Like, we've done it a couple different ways. We've done it with, like, a shot clock from Apocalypse World, representing time in Hot Springs. We do the poker chips representing 4-hour watches, which seems to work really well and is a really cool physical measurement of time going by. So you can kind of see the chips trickle down as the day is going on. And I think it's a really, really cool element of realism to it, because everything has to be done in a certain amount of time. And especially in like Call of Cthulhu and that one, Trail of Cthulhu, because rituals always got a deadline on them. There's always like the grand conjunction is happening and the, Saturn is in the whatever Cancer area. I don't know, whatever it is. And so stuff has to be done like right now. Otherwise, we have to wait another 1,000 years. But I think it's kind of cool too, though, because in that moment, it's sort of, in the Call of Cthulhu sense, right? So if you're trying to prevent some ritual happening, it's a constraint, but it's also a benefit to you. Because if you know that the ritual has to happen at 10 o'clock on this day, it means we just have to put all of our chips on this one moment right here, right? So it's kind of, it's a constraint to get things ready for that moment, but then you just have to survive that one moment for this game, which is kind of cool in and of itself, right? It's like you're setting things up for the boss fight or whatever, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Right on. So my sort of honorable mention for favorite threats is True Fae. I think Changeling the Lost really changed my mind about things with them, and then reading Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, because they sort of fit every category. It's like this alien thing that you just can't possibly understand and is not human, like so inhuman that it just doesn't register, but not like a gray alien. You know what I mean? You know, so. Mm-hmm.
It's another thing that's difficult to do well. Yeah,
I agree. But I think the Fae thing makes it sort of like, it puts in this mystical classification to where it makes it sort of relatable to where you can kind of pull it off a little easier, right? Where it's not so hokey like, oh, what is this little flying saucer doing here?
Like what I said about Hester on the last episode.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He's a relatable sort of elder god.
Right. All right, Ron, so do you want to do least favorite then? So I've got one. I'll just jump right in.
Way too.
So my least favorite, I kind of already mentioned it, is zombies.
Aww.
I realize it's kind of probably an unpopular opinion right now because it's zombie everything everywhere. And I think it's just sort of like oversaturation. And The Walking Dead has gone on too long, you know, and there's just a lot of zombie everything. And when it first started happening and coming out and getting more and more popular, it was cool. But then it's like anything, it sort of overstayed its welcome. And it's cool that it's sort of like the modern monster. You know, it doesn't have ties to, you know, the 15th or 12th century or whatever. You know, like it's a more modern myth, right? And that part of it is cool. But the idea of sort of this faceless mob that's just going to keep coming at me in a story, I think is cool and can be compelling. But in a role-playing game, I think that just gets tiresome because I don't functionally see a difference between that and sort of like a mob of goblins who are, you know, maybe they're a little smarter, but let's be honest, probably not a ton, you know. And then like there's like just sort of like gradual steps up from zombie hordes or skeleton hordes or whatever. And I just sort of find them boring. I don't know. You know, it's just sort of like a resource management thing. Okay, cool. So there's 6,000 zombies coming. I can kill 6 per round. I have this much. It's more like a resource management game at that point to see how many you can chop down in the body pile around you for however long that can be. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'm tired of them. I'm bored of it. So.
Oh, zombies.
Did that help or no?
Well, like, I don't know. I have an idea. I'm just not sure how to articulate it exactly.
Okay.
Senseless challenges, I guess, is what I'm going to go with.
How so, like?
So, you know that point when you get to where you're like, okay, I'm playing a 5th level character, and now I'm fighting all these half-level creatures to get to the big bad guy?
Yeah.
Like, there's never any risk.
Right. No, I definitely know what you mean. It kind of ties directly into the zombie thing. It's like, how many of my hit points do you want me to just take off before we get to the boss fight?
Well, and I also don't like senseless challenges when it comes to roles that don't feel necessary. So it's not really like a class in D&D, but like if I'm a craftsman and I want to build something, there should not be a role for that. I'm a craftsman. It should be assumed that I can build this thing.
Right.
You want to roll to see if I can add some extras, but like given no time constraint,
right,
I can just build the thing. Like there's no reason that there should be some kind of pass-fail mechanic for this. Whatever that thing is for your character that is building your crafting table.
Right. No, I agree. And
it's another senseless challenge.
So I'm going to kind of bring your favorite and your least favorite together into one thing, right? So in Veins of the Earth, there's no climbing checks. Unless there is one of two things, a lack of equipment or a time constraint.
Right, so and that makes sense.
Yeah, if you have the appropriate amount of equipment and you can take your time, then you just make the climb, and it's more about just how much time do I take off, right? Versus making a climb check every 10 feet to see where it is you fall off of the cliff. Because
I guess I'm going to sum it up like this. my least favorite threat is petty challenges. Because that's really what it is. Like, we've all been in game with a game master, and you're like, well, I'm going to light a fire. What are you going to light a fire with? Well, I'm an adventurer. I'm sorry I didn't write flint and steel on my list, but like, when you go out into the wilderness, I'm sure I would have thought to have something to light a fire, because I'm an adventurer. Like,
and
pettiness.
Especially if you're dealing with where it incorporates dice rolls. And this is something that from Burning Wheel is, it's just, they call it let it stand, right? There's one roll and you just let it stand. Because if I'm going to sneak into the castle, I'm going to make my sneak check, and then I either pass or fail, right? And if I succeed, I just sneak into the castle. Because otherwise all you're doing is, here's the first guard. Okay, I'm going to roll to sneak past him. Okay, I made it. The second guard, I roll to sneak past him. All you're really doing is rolling to see when do you fail.
Right.
Which gets tedious, and then it makes, like, if you continue to roll the dice enough, you're going to hit that bell curve. And it's like, why don't we just pick where you want me to start the encounter for when things go wrong? I see
that point, but I also don't, because you make your fighter roll every time he wants to attack something.
That's true. It is a little weighted that way, like, I guess. But yeah,
rogue's gonna rogue, fighter's gonna fight.
Right.
Why is he only got to roll once?
Right. I see what you're saying, but like, I think thematically, in terms of story, they're kind of two different things. One is like a montage, and the other one is a battle scene. Do you know what I mean? So
I think it would be more interesting to be like, okay, I planned out that there were 6 different stops along the way. So roll 6 dice. Mm-hmm. Let's see the amount of successes and fails, and we'll see how far you make it, and we'll see what that looks like.
Right.
I don't know. I feel like that would be more interesting to me.
I don't know. I can see it kind of both ways. Because at the same time, if it's a huge amount of sneaking, perhaps it should be more than one roll, right? But I don't know. It's one of those things you just got to kind of feel it out in the moment. But I see what you're saying about like the tediousness of it all, where it's just like, okay, I'm 10 feet for traps, 10 feet for traps, 10 feet for traps. Come on. What are we doing?
And then the one time you didn't roll, they were like, oh, there's a trap. Yeah, like, you can just give me like a spot check every once in a while. We'll see.
Right.
The over and under is roll percentiles. Okay, you found 80% of the traps.
Right on. All right, so I have an honorable mention real quick, which is probably going to make some people's heads explode. But one of my least favorite villains is Cthulhu.
But why?
I mean, I get the game is called Trail of Cthulhu and Call of Cthulhu, but there are so many other elder gods and powers to call on and whatnot, and it seems like the default is sort of these, things that directly connect to Cthulhu. And I like the idea of Cthulhu, and I think it's really cool, but it's just one of those things where it's in that universe, it's like, I don't know. It's
sort of like in a giant world of potential settings and creatures. Why would you limit yourself to just Dungeons and Dragons?
Okay, but see, here's the thing. How many dungeons have you been in?
Lots.
How many dragons were there?
A fair amount.
But not like every single time, right?
No.
And that's the thing that I feel about Cthulhu sometimes. It's like, I've done lots of investigations. It's always Cthulhu. It's always Cthulhu. Do you know what I mean? It's like and I get it. It's in the name. I get that part of it, right? But I'm kind of like...
You sound like Velma and Scooby-Doo.
But do you know what I'm saying? And I like Cthulhu, but I think that there are far more compelling elder gods than Cthulhu. So, like, obviously Hastur is the best, but not to rave on too much about him because we did that not too long ago. But
well, the point, though, I feel like is there's it's the same complaint I always have with the monster manual, right? There's 5 monster manuals or more, probably more now, full of umpteen pages. You could just pick the ones that just have pictures and not even select any of the ones that they didn't warrant a photo, and you would still have
artwork, not a photo.
Yeah, sorry. No, those are live action, like
no, you're good.
Photos, JPEGs.
Right. There's no actual pictures of dragons.
Shut up.
It's all good.
So, I mean, yeah, you could pick ones, just ones with artwork and exclude all the ones that didn't even warrant an image, right?
Yeah.
and you would have hundreds. Mm-hmm. So why are we seeing the same 20? Right? It's the same way with the Cthulhu mythos. Like, there are dozens of them.
Yeah.
Why can people only name 2 or 3?
I'm very conflicted about it because at the same time I feel like you're kind of paying homage to it, and I get it, but like Azathoth and Shub-Niggurath is my other favorite. There's just so many more options to go to sort of keep players on their toes in a way. Now, functionally, in terms of what happens in the game, a lot of times there's not terribly mechanically much of a difference whether I say...
You're still dying or going crazy.
Right.
Or both.
But there's different themes that come up with, like, Shub-Niggurath versus Cthulhu or Yog-Sothoth or, Nyarlathotep or whoever it is. So I don't know. It's just shrug. You know what I'm saying? It would be
kind of fun if you could connect it, though. Like, every Trail of Cthulhu character I've ever made died to Cthulhu.
Right. So do you have another an honorable mention or no?
No.
Alrighty, right on. I don't know if I want to mention I have this one written down or not. I'm back and forth. I have AI written down.
As a plus or a minus?
As a minus. So...
Explain yourself, sir.
I may cut this out. I don't know. So I'm going to go on a little rant. Okay, so computing power is getting much and much, like, hugely growing, right? So they did this thing where they were like, if computing power gets to a certain point, like if you were studying something with the assistance of an AI and you went home at night, over the course of that night, the AI would keep running its simulations or whatever and thinking about it. And it would think about it in, like, I can't remember the exact, numbers for how long it would take it to get to this point, but it would be like 32,000 years it would have thought about this thing. And then you would come back to work the next day, right? And it would have solved this problem or spent 32,000 years of time thinking about this, right? Mm-hmm. So in terms of it being an antagonist, are you really bothering this thing at all? Because whatever problem that you present to it, it spent 32,000 years figuring out how to break you and beat you.
I hear you complained, and I counter you with The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Right, but you know what I'm saying? Like, the AIs aren't whatever is Melvin.
Yeah, no, they have all the answers. Yeah, no, now you gotta create a machine to find the question.
Right, but like you watch iRobot, and it's like that. We're not gonna win that fight, dude. Do you know what I mean? It's just I don't know. It's this.
One 13-year-old hacker with too much Mountain Dew. Problem solved. That's what I'm saying.
I don't know. It's weird to me. Do you know what I mean? And as we get closer and closer to it, it just seems like it makes it more and more like insurmountable in a way. Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I don't know.
It doesn't make any sense to me.
What do you mean?
That you think that true fae are awesome and you think that elder gods are awesome, but the idea of super intelligent artificial intelligence that is beyond your comprehension and understanding is instantly lame.
Very good. Now, let me draw a solid wall between the two and show you how.
No.
In my mind, this happens.
The wall is not solid.
It is rock solid. So,
but
true
like
fae...
From this angle, if you turn this way, it's just full of holes.
True fae, hang on. True fae abide by a certain set of rules and contracts of agreements that were made a millennia ago.
Computers.
There's no 3 rules programmed into them necessarily. Do you know what I mean? Like, thou shalt not harm or whatever. But, like...
It's more like a set of rules, like if this, then that.
Right, but whereas when you have the Fae, it's like, I can't be around ringing bells. There's all this like mythology that goes along with it. There's no mythology that goes along with AI. It just is. It's super intelligent and smarter and able to puzzle it out faster than you are, right? And then Cthulhu, like, it's just incomprehensible. They break shit because they do.
But you just said that the AI is incomprehensible. Like, it's thought so far beyond where you're at that it is literally beyond your level of comprehension.
Maybe it's just the fact that the mystical element is pulled out of it, then that is actually the source of my issue with it. Because, like, incomprehensible with the elder gods is easy because there's this mythical quality to them, right? And then maybe when you pull that away, that's what I don't like. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I quit thinking about it and started thinking about what if all of the elder gods were actually AI computers.
Whoa. We're living in a simulation, and they're like the viruses. They're Neo. Cthulhu Neo. Somewhere, someone is screaming at their speakers right now. I don't know. I think maybe it is that mystic quality. So like that's what sort of changes it in my mind for me. That makes it okay. Is that one is sort of has this like mythic quality to it. So it doesn't have to answer to some reality or whatever. Whereas the other one is sort of hyper real and super logical. So that's what makes it no fun. Because I think that is it. Because then like in terms of like why does the AI have make things happen? Well, it's all. There's a chain of logic that you can follow through it. You know, now maybe it's playing 4-dimensional chess and you're playing checkers, so you can't understand why you're doing the things, but it just seems insurmountable in a way that's not fun. Whereas with like Trail of Cthulhu, it's like, hey, how do I go crazy? Right? You know? I don't know.
But I just don't agree with your thinking on it. Even if it's removing the mythology. So go back to the ghost thing, right? Mm-hmm. You like ghosts, and you talked about how the gothic horror, right? So ghosts reinforce the things that are wrong with us. That's the same thing that AI does. That's the same reason that we worry about it. Because if you follow it through, like all of the stories about artificial intelligence going wrong have to do with the negative aspects we see in our own culture and our own existence that are
I can see that. I just think that sometimes with the ghost part of it, maybe that part is because it's more personalized. Because this ghost is a reflection of me as an individual and my character's own shortcomings or this character's own shortcomings, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas the AI it's more of the cold hard logic of society and where things are being pushed. So it's less personal and more societal, maybe. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? I don't know that that's what I really think. It's just, it just popped into my head that way.
I think to me that just makes it more disturbing. The fact that it's the logic of mankind echoed back without any of the personal features, without any of the humanity.
This is where I kind of came down to on, and I forgot to mention this, is that in terms of for a story or a movie, I'm good to watch it. I like it. I eat that up. Black Mirror, wicked cool, right? All good. But in terms of a role-playing game, I don't see a reasonable way to beat them. So, like, whilst 2001 is an amazing movie, it is a terrible RPG.
Well, but we played that RPG.
What one?
That in the Dread game that I ran for you guys.
But I think that, okay, so you're right, and that's a one-shot, and it's Dread. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to pull a mulligan and say, when we're playing Dread, we're playing 2001 the RPG. And in that sense, it works because we all know what's going to happen, and we know the tower's going to come down, and we know the airlock's not going to open or whatever it is, and we're all going to die. And Hal is going to, in his ever so soothing voice, just say, I can't do that. Right? And that's just what it's going to be. So in those moments, yes, I'm on board with it. But on like a longer term thing, I don't know. I think it's just, I don't find it compelling. Do you know what I'm saying? I don't want to play a 10-session game where we're fighting an AI. I am all down to play Dread and see how this wicked, terrible machine kills me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we found out what we're going to do this year.
What's that?
We're going to play games featuring AI until James changes his mind.
So I don't know. I'm. It's not like an automatic no-go for me. It's just I think that there are things that I personally find more interesting, I guess. Do you know what I'm saying? So this is the one I struggled with because I was like, I see where the flaws in my argument are, but at the same time, I'm just kind of like, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? You don't agree with me at all, do you?
No, not remotely. I feel like I made that clear.
It's okay. You're wrong. So I don't know. We'll see. I don't know if I'll leave it in or not. It's just one of those weird things though, where I was just like thinking about it, and I was like, I don't know, because I do realize the connection between Cthulhu and the True Fae, and do you know what I mean? But I don't know. Somehow there's like I think that the mythos part of it, like the mythical aspects of it, and then there doesn't have to be a logic to things necessarily. Whereas I feel like with AI, there has to be a logic. So,
You'd say it's programmed.
yeah. See. I don't know. It's all good. All right, so I think that'll do it for us, and we'll wrap this one up here. As you know, we are a member of the Gonna Geek Network, so you can head over to GonnaGeekNetwork.com and check out all kinds of awesome geeky podcasts over there, covering all kinds of broad topics from geeky TV shows to video games to podcasting to RPGs to board games. And yeah, check them out. There's a lot of good stuff over there. If you like what we do here at Just One More Fix, you can support us at patreon.com/JustOneMoreFix and get access to all of our pre-shows, raw audio feeds, as well as our quarterly zine in PDF or print form, depending on what level you pledge at. And you can join all the awesome ranks of our Patreon supporters like Alistair H., Alan White, Hector Trelane, Simon McNair, Timothy Barra, Tiziano Furlano, and the OG Todd Olson. I think that'll do it for us, and we will see you guys next week.
Thanks for listening. This has been an episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetech.com. You can support us at patreon.com/JustOneMoreFix or follow us on Twitter at Just One More Fix.